Following World War II, the United States played a major role in shaping the future of Japanese government in terms of distribution of power, military composition, and construction of laws in several ways. During the war, Japan's warfare tactics were considered to be barbaric and brutal by the United States and many of the Allied countries. A few of these tactics include events such as the Nanking Massacre and the Bataan Death March. The Nanking Massacre occurred in Nanking, China, where Japanese soldiers killed hundreds of thousands of unarmed Chinese civilians and raped up to 80,000 women. The Bataan Death March took place in the Philippines, where the Japanese soldiers forced 75,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war on a march 61 gruesome miles long. During the march, Japanese soldiers murdered and tortured the prisoners. As a result of these actions, the Allies developed mutual.
Prior to World War II, Japan's government was modeled after a military dictatorship with the emperor as an autocrat. Though the emperor was viewed as a sole leader within Japan, he did not rule like other military dictators such as Hitler. He often met with a council to make political decisions and took advice from several ministers. Japan did not want to be manipulated by Western powers, so it chose to develop a strong army and navy. With an impressive military force at his disposal, the Emperor of Japan decided to display their power by participating in conflict with Russia over control of Manchuria and Korea, and also World War I. Though they had decided to become allies with Britain during World War I, they gained no respect from the West as a result of their efforts against the Germans, and tensions began to rise. In the 1921 Washington Naval Conference, Japan was a participant but wasn't granted battleship and carrier tonnage that would be on par with Britain and the U.S., so this further convinced the Japanese that the United States had no respect for them, leading to an unquenchable thirst for power. Shortly after the conference, Japan once again began a conflict with Russia in order to regain power over Manchuria. Soon thereafter, Japan joined with Germany and Italy, and World War II began.
This decision of Japan resulted in several efforts to mold the seemingly barbaric Asian nation into one that would better serve the needs of the United States while improving their own government. The United States initially began this mission through occupation of Japan by U.S. troops beginning on August 28, 1945. Japan was allowed to maintain their original political structure throughout occupation. However, the existing government was rendered useless due to the fact that they were forced to submit to the ultimate authority of the United States. The first post-war elections were held in 1946. Prior to the election, many new political parties were forming within Japan, including the Japanese Socialist Party, the Japanese Communist Party, the Liberal Party, the Japanese Progressive Party, and various conservative parties. The 1946 election marked the first time in Japan's history that women were allowed to vote. This can be attributed to American political influence through the example of the women's suffrage movement within the United States in the late 19th century and early 20th century.
Key players on the American side that contributed greatly to the American influence of Japan's political structure was General Douglas MacArthur. The surrender of Japan on September 2, 1945 signaled a key event that would provide the foundation for future American influence on the Japanese political structure. Towards the end of January 1945, the Japanese were contemplating surrender. Upon this event, the terms of surrender proposed by the Japanese were sent through British and U.S. channels and were collected in a 40-page dossier by General Douglas MacArthur. This dossier was then transferred to President Roosevelt. Currently, these proposals for peace came into fruition just 2 days before the Yalta Conference. This is, in effect, convenient because the Yalta Conference, which was headed by the Big Three, would discuss Europe's post-war reorganization. However, it is later noted that Roosevelt disregarded these conditions of surrender by Japan and would only accept a non-conditional surrender. It is this fact that would provide the basis for America's future role in its influence over Japan.
Another major event that took place during the occupation was the revision of Japan's constitution. One of the new amendments to the constitution stated that the nation of Japan was not allowed to have a military. Instead, they were permitted to maintain a defense force, and absolutely could not attack a nation unless they were attacked first, or the people of Japan would have to answer to the United States, in addition to whatever country they were fighting against. The United States also agreed to come to Japan's aid if they were ever attacked by another country. This bond remains intact today. The lack of military that Japan has essentially forced them to remain allies with the United States. Through this, American influence has been inflicted upon Japan. Japan is still very strong allies with America and will remain that way for the foreseeable future.
Though not identical to that of the United States, Japan's political structure has evolved over time and has retained a number of similarities to the American system. This is due to the fact that the United States not only imposed their own type of government structure upon Japan, but also because Japan desired to ally itself with the U.S. and become more like its neighbors to the West. Japan concluded that it was better to learn from the mistakes and take after the example of the more dominant power. Like the United States, Japan's political structure is composed of three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial.
Japan's current government also consists of a constitutional monarchy with the Emperor Akito as the head of state. The President of the United States acts not only as the head of state, but also as the head of the government, military commander-in-chief, and chief diplomat. Though he lacks any significant political power, Japan's emperor is an important diplomatic symbol to the general population. The executive branch is headed by a prime minister, currently Naoto Kan, and his cabinet. This prime minister is essentially the Japanese equivalent to the United States president. The prime minister, along with the 242 members of the National Diet, a bicameral parliament, control the vast majority of the decisions made within the Japanese government.
The National Diet, much like the legislative branch within the United States political structure, is the bicameral Congress, consisting of a House of Representatives and a House of Councilors, while the U.S. has a Senate and their own House of Representatives. Both legislative branches hold the power to create laws. The judicial branches of the two political structures differ slightly. They both possess a Supreme Court in addition to several other lower courts. However, the power of the U.S. Supreme Court is more balanced within the government within the legislative and executive branches, while Japan's Supreme Court is independent of either two branches.
It is doubtful that Japan will ever surpass the United States in world politics, primarily due to the amendments they were forced to make to their constitution following their submission to the United States after World War II. Trade treaties, and international organizations that facilitate peaceful interactions between Japan and the U.S. have made it unlikely for Japan to rise up against one of their most powerful allies in the future. Overall, as a direct result of U.S. military occupation and political influence, one can see the clear connection between Japan's more recently constructed political structure and the United States government.